Okay, here we are. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Service Genie webinar. Myself hosting again today, and I'm also joined once again by my consultant, or our consultant, Adam Davis.
Morning.
And also, normally the tech guy, but dying to chip in and get involved, my colleague, Adrian Clark. Morning, Adrian.
Morning.
How are we all? Everyone okay?
Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, raring to go and talking about PPM.
As always.
Excellent. So today's, sorry, I should say before we go, for those guys, obviously a lot of people watch this in their own time, retrospectively, but if you are live with us today and you want to ask a question, feel free. We will keep an eye on the chat and we will endeavour to deal with any questions that you have, of course. So jump in at any point. We're focusing today broadly on preventative maintenance, planned preventative maintenance. There are, of course, lots of different ways of phrasing it. If we move on to the first slide, I think that'll help give some structure and context to what we're going to talk about. Adam, I suppose out of the three of us, you talk to people far more often than we do. Mm-hmm. So whilst Adrian and I probably have the benefits of more experience, you're kind of at the coalface, as it were, talking to these people on a daily basis. I suppose the thing that struck me when I was looking at this and we started talking about it was initially, how do people do it now?
Well, I think what surprises, not so much surprising me anymore because of having these conversations a lot, but what comes up quite a lot is the manual systems. Now, what I mean by manual systems is a lot of people might use Excel as an example, or even in the extreme cases, T-cards, systems on the wall, to manage the service visits. So in the Excel example, Microsoft Excel example, they'll have lots of data in quite a large spreadsheet, managing the equipment, and then also the services on that. Now, straight away, that sounds like a lot of admin. Managing
people, obviously, we're a service management software provider.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of them out there, and there are lots of them in use. So that it's a little bit surprising that you say people use Excel a lot. Why are people not using if they've got a service management system? Why don't they just use that?
Well, these companies, they will have systems in place. They don't just run their whole company purely on Excel. So they'll have lots of systems in place to help do other aspects of the work, and it could be job related as well. But with that, they may not know, or they might not be able to use the functionality in those systems to manage the service side. So what happens then is they've got one system doing some part of the business, perhaps the jobs or engineering side, and another part in an Excel example doing spreadsheet managing their service visits, which means you're just always to and fro in between systems. So it's not that they don't have systems in place, it's just the functionality or knowledge of how to use it.
So what we're saying is it's fairly common to have people using Excel to manage the maintenance schedule. Mm-hmm. And they may use that in addition to some kind of service management tool or other ERP system.
Yeah.
It's not really the purpose of why we're talking about this today, but it is interesting to try and hypothesize, why is that? Why are people not using the service management system? Is it, when I used to talk to people more often than I do now, it would quite often be linked to either functionality of the system, or it might have been that the knowledge about how to use it, that part of the system effectively had left the business. But ultimately, does it come down to trust? People being able to trust or not the system they use?
Yeah, I was going to make now. It does come down to trust and not knowing whether the system is capable of it and if they actually trust the data in it. So then they move to Excel because they find it's a trusty way of managing their data. But then that in turn means they become very heavily reliant on Excel.
What's the risk of using Excel?
Well, if they become heavily reliant on it, it takes a lot of time to keep that data up to date and manage it. Make sure, in this example, the service dates are correct. Ultimately, that means someone or a human is managing that data, and with that comes a lot of risk of human error. Who's looking at who's managing that spreadsheet? Are they putting the right service dates in correctly? Are the service dates moving forward correctly? And then, of course, you have no idea who's really accessing it either.
Well, I guess the purpose of today is to briefly talk about this. Then we're going to jump into looking at at the software so we can try and give people options as to how possibly they could do it better. Because obviously a lot of people, they know technology exists, but they don't necessarily know what the possibilities are. So we're hopefully going to demonstrate that a little today. Obviously, I looked at these slides before we jumped on the webinar this morning, and a couple of them stood out to me, which I thought, for the first couple of minutes, it's worth mentioning. The first one really was increased maintenance failures, which you've got there towards the top of the right hand side. Yeah. Now, that makes, when I thought about that, when I first increased maintenance failures, and then after a few minutes of thinking about it, I was like, I know what you're getting at there. What you're saying is, actually, if you don't stick to the PPM schedule, that's the consequence. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what happens there?
Yeah, well, of course, if you're not keeping that equipment, whatever it might be in whatever industry, up to date and in service, then naturally it's probably going to break down more.
Yeah, so it is as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah,
and always,
because it's not being kept. Sorry, Adrian.
And always at the worst time possible.
Yeah, exactly, and it could be at a peak part of the season. And not forward planning, and there's just no one knows when the services is due. It kind of gets put on the back burner, and then when you're not expecting it, that piece of equipment breaks down or fails.
And a good part of the time is because companies are chasing the tail, trying to do the reactive work, that they don't have time to do all the pre-planned work. Where in actual fact, with companies that I've spoken to, if they were focused on getting the PPMs done effectively and efficiently, they would have less breakdowns. So, I mean, I spoke to one of our clients literally about a week or so ago, and they were doing 70% repairs against the rest being PPMs, service work. Since they focused on doing the service, it switched. So they're now doing more PPMs, and as a result, they're getting a lot less breakdowns, and they're also getting much happier customers. Yeah. So,
well, that's the unintended consequence, isn't it? That's what we're getting to here. Is these are all, in many respects, unintended consequences of not automating and not managing the schedule correctly. Now, we work with the industry, but not in the industry. So it's important to point that out as a caveat, because we know from talking to people that the reality is they're bogged down in the day-to-day. They can't get past tomorrow or next week because, as Adrian said, they've got this backlog. That backlog often occurs because they don't have, it goes back to the conversation about Excel. They don't have the foresight. They're not able to see what's coming, can they? And that's what creates that backlog in the first place. Is I don't know what's around the corner. I might know what's around the corner next week, and I might know that I'm 3 months behind, but I don't know what's beyond that. And it's never catching up because you're never able to plan effectively. That's fair, isn't it? That is what people tell us all the time.
It's essentially a bit of a vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
There could be many reasons why they're not keeping up to date with the services, though. Visibility is obviously one of the main ones, but possibly they don't have the parts in order to deliver those services. So for most industries, certainly for some of the key ones we deal with, you can usually get parts next day. But that also then feeds into the first time fix scenario. So you either can't fulfill your services as and when you need to do them, or you can't fix an issue when it arises the first time because you've got to go back and order the part. So it's all about, I think, having a larger overview of what's going on, both when are they due and what resources do you need, who's going to be available, what parts do you need. So it's, there's quite a few facets to it.
Yeah, but that was great. That was very succinctly put. It is if you're not keeping on top of your PPM schedule, you're gonna have more breakdowns, exactly. And that has a multitude of negative effects associated with it. The other one, because I'm conscious we move on to the demo as quickly as we can, or the next one that struck my eye was the contract profitability. Now, yes, again, it sounds like an obvious statement to make, but what struck me about that was, particularly if you're using things like Excel, but isn't the reality that although contract profitability is affected and probably decreased, people don't really know?
Well, they don't know because the data isn't there to use and examine and report on.
Yeah. So, because what goes back to the increased maintenance failures, if you've got a customer and you do their breakdowns and you do the maintenance contract, then even if you are able to see some level of P&L on the contract, if actually you're behind on the PPM schedule and the unintended consequence is doing more breakdowns, you're probably not associating the cost of those breakdowns with the contract. So actually you get a skewed view of what work you're doing for that customer and why, and what the overall profitability is.
Yeah, and how that affects the business then is going forward. If you are renewing a contract with a client in that example where you don't know how profitable it is, how do you know what to charge for your contract?
Yeah.
How do you know if you're making a loss or making a profit on those pieces of equipment? You quite frankly don't.
Just got interrupted by an 18-month-old child.
That's the are they interested in service as well?
The unintended consequences of working from home. Okay, yeah. So profitability, we've see some people are probably looking at this and saying, well, if I make money out of the breakdown job, what's the problem? But one of the other things that is particularly relevant right now and has been more recently is the demands of our customers. So the people who are watching it, their customers, they're much more demanding now, aren't they? Well, they are. We know they are from the questions that we get asked and the requests that we get. They want to know, how are you performing against the PPM? When are you coming to do the PPM? When are these assets due? And they want all of that information. So they're starting to demand more information from the supplier of whatever service they take, and they want to know how they perform against it. And that is something that is much more prevalent now, isn't it?
Yeah, we've touched on this topic before in past webinars, but it's the on-demand information, as we call it. Everyone now has, with smartphones, you have data at the fingertips straight away, regardless of what it is, whether it's work or personal life. It could be anything, and that reflects back into work when they're looking at assets and equipment, as example. They want that, they expect that information there and then straight away. And ultimately, if you're using Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that, becomes an impossible task, I've found anyway, speaking to customers.
I agree, and we could probably go on for another 10 minutes with that one, but again, conscious of time. Last one that I wanted to just briefly highlight was compliance or compliance issues, as you phrased it. Now, I guess it's compliance in this context is quite a broad term, because I guess we're saying it's compliance in relation to type, maybe not PPM specifically, but scheduled regular periodic visits that might have some legal connotation, such as, I don't know, the lift industry or a thorough examination or something like that. And then also compliance around what we've just discussed. You are contracted to go and perform a certain task on this particular asset at this period over this term. So I've got a 3-year contract that requires me to go and do a type A visit once every 6 months and a type B visit once every 12 months. You're contracted to do that. That in itself is compliance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's the legal requirement that the service provider needs to make sure that the equipment's still in, like I say, in their service period, I guess, and still up and running correctly. And again, so I go to some companies in different industries, and they have no real idea when the services are due. They may have no idea whether that asset is actually legally compliant at that point in time.
And just broadly speaking, the point of this is we want to help people do this better, don't we? And we're confident that we can. So let's just move on now, because we want to get into the demonstration. I think there's one more slide which will take 10 seconds on, which is, if you do manage it better and you use automation to do that in the software that you use, there are ways that you can improve that. And we've talked about all of those: integrated scheduling, a reduction in effectively breakdown, service calls, improving customer satisfaction, being able to demonstrate to your customers that you are performing at the level they expect, and making your engineers more efficient. So actually being able to ensure that they have the right tools at the right time for the right job.
Yeah, basically. And I'll go through that now in the demonstration. Sort of, let's call it the service journey as such. From the point of managing those contracts, I'll talk about now managing the contracts, managing the schedule of work behind that contract against a piece of equipment or an asset, and talking about the service work there. Into managing that schedule into our scheduling system, and how we then communicate to the customer.
And I'm sure you're going to get onto this, but the first thing that draws my eye immediately on that page is smack in the middle, you've got a service forecast.
Yeah, straight away. So that's because this is how I design my own page. So if anyone's if whoever's watched this webinar today, some people may have already seen this homepage, but I'll just quickly explain it again and why I have it set up. So this is a service genie solution. When I log in as my own user, I get my own homepage and I can design this myself. So what I mean by that is I can add on my own modules that I use more often than not, KPIs, and then more importantly, as you pointed out, reports. So I've got on my homepage a service report straight away, a service forecast. So here I've created this myself as a user because it's a report that interests me more than any other reports. And from that, I can see the service is due by numbers in each month, and you can then see if it's seasonal in some cases.
You're going to show us where and how you generate that later on, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to take too much time on it now.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to say, I just wanted to make that point that's what, as soon as you logged onto it, it's like, that's where my eye went straight away. But we'll cover that later. And
then furthermore, on this page as well, we have a notification feature as well. So this notification feature has a raft of notifications that get sent to certain users. But again, you'll send those notifications to users based on their role, perhaps, or what they need to do to carry out their job. And in this example, that could be notifications based on services and stock and contracts. So if a service has been accepted by a customer over email, let's say, someone needs to know about that to schedule that work in. Have stock parts come in for a specific service. Again, someone's going to receive a notification here to see that, or purchase orders that have been created for those service work. And another one is contracts. So contracts that are due to expire, someone might need to know about that. But basically, the way we design this homepage is to give all that information either through notifications or reports and KPIs to the users when they log in straight away, and then you can then action that and do their role. But I think what I'll do now is I'll jump straight into a contract and we'll look at the information behind that before we even start the service work, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
So what we have here is I've jumped into a contract. And straight away, we spoke about this earlier, how profitable is a contract. Here we can see straight away the costs against this already existing contracts, which at the moment is looking very profitable.
I'm sure there's a few people watching would love that one.
Yeah, so there's not many costs on this one at the moment, but let's say if there was, it would obviously show on here too. It's important to point out this is a demo system; it's not a live contract. So straight away we go on to the contracts, and you have a visibility of that, which is important when we come back to renewing contracts, as we spoke about earlier. We then have lots of parts to this contract, but for the purposes today, we're going to look at the equipment behind it. So if we go into here, we basically have the assets on that contract. We only have one here, which is a Toyota forklift truck. But behind that contract, the asset sits there. And of course, with that, we have what's called a service sequence. Now, the service sequence is important because it basically defines how often you're going to visit that truck and do a service. And the system needs to know that so that it can then run those jobs through. It's similar to when we talk about when people use Excel, they do that manually. They'll do that every time a service is visited, they have to change it. Exactly.
Yeah. So if you just click into there, I think what we're saying is that by setting the service sequence in the intervals, what you're able to do is build a profile for that asset. You're basically saying, I have to visit this asset at this period and do this type of work. So you've got there a minor and a major service type. So you're doing them each every 3 months.
Yeah, so they'll roll after each other every 3 months. So we've got a minor every 3 months and a major every 3 months. With that, you set how many people are required to do it for scheduling purposes, and the same for estimated hours, which is this column here.
Yeah, and that's vitally important, isn't it? Because that's what gives you the transparency of what's coming ahead. Now, that might be, to an extent, there may be some guesswork in there, but the vast majority of service managers will be able to tell you, if I go and visit that asset and I have to do a major service, I know it's probably going to take 2 guys all day or 5 hours or whatever the case may be. So it gives you pretty good visibility to be able to estimate the resource you're going to need moving forward, doesn't it?
Yeah, it allows you to forecast the demand on your resources and what you will need. So again, in some industries, if it's seasonal and they want to, let's say they want to do all the services when it's a relatively quiet period, so it doesn't affect their customers sort of what will the work they carry out. Yeah, exactly. So it's handy in that respect. And of course,
it's also quite good for benchmarking as well. So it might take most engineers the stipulated time to do a particular service, whether it be 1 hour or 2 hours. But you might find that 1 or 2 engineers either do it faster or slower. There could be a reason for that. Yeah. Now, the cynical part of me would say, well, if somebody's taking a longer time to do it, maybe they just bunking off or something.
Maybe they're just slow.
Yeah, slow like me. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's a case of retraining that engineer and the people that are doing it quicker, doing that knowledge transfer from the people.
Or maybe they're not. Or maybe they're not doing it as well.
Well, possibly, exactly. So it gives you a good idea of where to look, where are the problems within business, and who needs to be trained.
What's important about this scheduling, because the next screen you're going to go on, I think, is the equipment service schedule. But the reason this is important is because what you're actually defining here is you're saying, I have a contract that lasts 12 months or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, and I have to go and service this asset at this period and do these types of services. And that is what essentially is going to create the schedule and tell us what we've got commitments to in the future.
Yeah, basically, it's the setting up of the contract. So once the information's in, the system can then sort of handle itself and run those services.
And so I was just going to say, mate, it also makes sure that you can never miss it.
Exactly. You're constantly reminded of it because it's
what's interesting in here is the fact that this particular contract's set up with calendar days and fixed dates.
Yes.
But obviously what you can do in here is you can have fixed or variable dates. So, for instance, fixed dates means it's every 3 months. If you raise the first one early or late, then it's not going to affect any of the rest of the service pattern. But variable means that if you raise that service a month late, then all the other services go back by a month. So it keeps the same distance between each. But also what you can do is you can run your services based on hours, which is becoming much more common now. So it's more around the usage of the asset rather than just a random sort of set schedule. So what's becoming much more common is telematic information with the Internet of Things, to coin that horrible phrase. So being able to get the data from a piece of equipment in the field back to somebody so they can analyze what's happening with it. So we can now pull that data from the piece of equipment in real time against the contract. And if it's set as hours based, then it's actually the asset that's telling you when it's due a service rather than just the date, which is, meaning that equipment is less likely to fail.
Yeah, it's really important to point that out. It's planned versus preventative, and it's probably a webinar in itself.
Mm-hmm. There's loads to talk on. We could talk about that for hours, probably.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump on.
I'm going to move on to this page now, which I've already got open now. This is essentially the equipment service schedule. So that information we looked at against the contract when we talk about service frequencies and how often those services are due is put into here in a way where it's structured in here in a way where we can then manage those services and the users then come in and see when those services are due. So straight away, what you'll probably notice is we have a key, and these are color coordinated. So the red one's being overdue. We can see this one, the Rolls Royce, is overdue by 21 days. Due in 1 week, due in 2 weeks, and then due in 1 month. So we've got a few here.
Am I right in saying then, Adam, that the default view here, until you filter it, is your entire service schedule for the future?
It is.
Regardless of, so if you had, as most people will, hundreds, if not thousands of them, they're just going to scroll down that page as the default view, and then you're able to filter it.
Exactly. So at that point, we come in here and we'd service between certain date ranges. So if you wanted to forward plan for the next 3 months, you could do that by selecting from December up until let's say end of Feb as an example. And I hit search and it brings those ones up now.
Yeah.
So you can forward plan that. Again, it goes back to resources, making sure you've got the required resources in and you know what's up and coming.
One thing that we've not touched on is when we were looking at the sequences earlier and we were defining how many engineers were required and how long it should take to do a service. What we can actually do in the system is say, for a specific piece of equipment or for that model, you can actually link the parts that are required to deliver those services as well, which is quite handy. So as well as being able to plan your resource, you can also plan your stock. Because again, as I think I mentioned earlier, there's nothing worse than knowing that you've got services to do, but you haven't got the stocking.
That is what that is, that you've got highlighted, isn't it, Adam? Manage selected service items. So what we're saying there is, we can associate the parts requirement for those services. So that every time we create that type of service for that asset, it will tell us the parts that will need to fulfill a major service and the parts will need to fulfill a minor service on that particular asset. And then obviously, again, it's probably part of a parts webinar because we're limited to time. But effectively what that does is say to you, right, you've got this for in this 3-month period coming up that you've just looked for, these are the services that you've got a commitment to fulfill, and these are the parts that you will need to fulfill them. It then will allow us to say, right, are we able to fulfill that from stock? Do we need to raise purchase orders? And all of the, again, you know, the consequences of what the current state of play may be. That's what that does, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah, and it's automated in a way. So you don't, when you're planning your services, you only need to come in here and do that, rather than go into your warehouse or your stock room and see what you've got due on your Excel spreadsheet. Have we got the required stock parts in? Or even if you're doing it much more reactive, ordering your stock parts, and at that point it might be too late.
But you might have them in. You might be able to fulfill the services with the stock you have on the shelf.
Yeah.
But obviously, what you don't want is in the meantime for those stock parts to go off the shelf to fulfill some other kind of task like a repair. So actually, behind there, when you highlight the services that you want to plan, you can either book the stock to the job, you can order the stock if it's not in stock, or you can reserve the stock if it is on the shelf, or a combination of those. So it's giving you ultimate flexibility, really.
Yeah. I'm just going to explain very quickly here, because I've not touched on this part yet, what we're actually looking at. So I've done the filter of those service dates showing between the 1st December to the 28th of February. And then from that, I pulled up this job here for Service Junior forklifts. What we can see here is those make and models we're talking about, but these are the live assets, equipment ID 061, 062, and 063. And with that, it shows us the service dates and when they're due. So in an ideal world, you come in here and all these will be due within 1 week, 2 weeks, or 1 month, and not overdue. Obviously, some may fall overdue, but you'd be able to see that from them being read. And at this point, all you would do is tick which ones you want to raise and hit the raise jobs. And at that point, it becomes quite a simple process to raise all your service jobs for the next 2-3 months, or however far forward you plan. Whether that's
so each of these lines, we're saying we have services due for these guys. So if you drill down and open up the view of that, actually we're saying there's 3 assets that have services due
on these
in
dates.
the next week, and we've got the detail of each there. So we've got the make and the model. We've got the actual service date, which is they're all due on the same day because they're all part of the same contract.
Yep.
They're all a major service. We've got the estimate of hours, the number of people required. So actually we're saying one person can fulfill all of those in roughly 6 hours.
Yeah, so it's a day's work, less than a day's work, isn't it? But that's when you can forward plan that.
You've never done a 6-hour day.
No, I'll try not to anyway.
So I mean, there's you can show or hide information on all of those lines, though, can't you?
Yeah, so these column options you can choose what you want to see, but I've got mine set up as my preference.
I just noticed there was a description there, so you'd be able to see if it was a thorough exam or if it was just a straightforward PPM, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that sort of links here as well with service type. These are all majors here, and you get that idea from this point. And obviously, again, the people required and estimated hours. And then what you would do is just, if you wanted to raise them all, I'd tick all that and just hit that button there. And then those 5 sites will have their service jobs raised in the diary for someone to be allocated the work.
But actually, certainly for smaller organisations, if you've not got hundreds of engineers, you might know who it's going to go to. So obviously in the top right there, you could schedule it for those engineers. Because I did notice that you could assign an engineer to a particular type of service within that grid. Or you could give it directly to that engineer. So if you know that engineers, and this does happen quite commonly, is you'll have engineers working patches, so they deal with the same customer all the time. So again, to further speed things up, you can tick those. It's already got an engineer against it, issue it, and the job's on their device pretty much.
They know about it instantly, yeah.
Yeah, so that box is saying what state do we want to put this job in the scheduler, which we'll look at in a second when it's actually created.
Exactly, that's how that works. So the engineer will be notified on it straight away if you let them do their work as they wish.
Just before you move off the screen, one thing that reminded me was one of the options you've got at the top, because we get asked about it a lot, is skip selected services.
Yes.
Now, I understand why people do that, because often, as Adrian alluded to earlier, if you've got a 3-month cycle in which you're visiting an asset or a site, actually, if you're 2 or 3 months behind on your preventative maintenance scheduling, it's not uncommon for people to skip that service. One of the things that we spoke about not that long ago, actually, about somebody that was doing this quite regularly was just think of the missed revenue.
Oh, yeah.
Because most people, get paid for a service job when they do the job. Some people get paid periodically, don't they? So they'll invoice monthly or quarterly or whatever the case may be over the term of the contract. But most people get paid per job. So yeah, how many people are doing that? How much money is getting lost?
And they're only doing that because they have no real way of knowing when they have an Excel spreadsheet in some examples where they know the service due, but no one's gone into there and noticed it. Or they have noticed 3 months down the line and have to skip it.
It's important to say it's not through lack of desire or care or professionalism. It's lack of clarity that overwhelms people to get them to the point that the things that we've been talking about.
Exactly. But okay, I think I'll move forward now to our scheduler.
Yeah, so what you've done is you've clicked the button to say I want to create the jobs.
Yeah, I've hit that, erase job, and then they would appear in here.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot going on this page, so I'll just very briefly explain what's on here. It is worth pointing out this page is actually designed to be used over 2 or 3 screens if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So you would have a diary on one screen and the job list on another screen if you needed to. But obviously for demos and these sort of webinars, it's difficult to have multiple screens. So what we're looking at is a job list. And again, we're using the color scheme. So these colors indicate where those jobs are up to. So we can see we've got some service jobs here. We've got some reactive jobs too. The red ones are ones that have been raised and unissued. So no one knows about it. It needs to be given to, no engineer knows about it. It needs to be scheduled on their diary and issued to them. When it becomes scheduled, it turns orange, and then issued when it's sent to their device, so they know about it. So it's important to have these stages so you can forward plan again and you can put these in the diary, plan how the work's looking for the next week, 2 weeks, or a few months, or whatever it might be. And you can amend them and change them if you need to up until the point the engineer needs to know about the work. And that's essentially why we have that.
Yeah, understood.
With that, we have a map and diary, so you can drop on where the jobs are on the diary, see what's going on. So if I just hit those 2 and put show on map, it will drop those 2 jobs on there. You can do for all of them. You could filter by postcode, let's say. And it's the same for engineers. I can drop the engineers in the diary too and see where their location is. But essentially, for easy planning, the jobs come into here. We can notice this one's unissued, so let's give this one to myself. Just because I've got today's date open, I'll drop it on my diary. It's actually telling me here the service is due on the 16th of January. But we're going to do it now. So if I say give it a new date, it's another good example. I'm actually out of geographical area for this job, but I'm going to ignore that.
So that is alerting you to say that you don't normally cover that area.
Basically saying, well, he's less in this section. Well, he's up in the north. He's in Manchester, Stockport. He doesn't need to do the jobs down in London.
Yeah. Do you really want to go and send into that job in Aberdeen?
Is it efficient, really?
Another important point maybe is that skill set as well. So if that engineer doesn't have the required skills, then it will also bring a message up to say that should you be giving them that job?
So now we can see I've got these jobs on here. All right, but I've ignored the warning, so it probably isn't a very good day for me, but it has dropped them on there. You can hover over these jobs and see exactly what they are as well. So you can see this is a site for ROB4 trucks, and it's against a Toyota on the far right hand side of that pop-up.
Yeah.
So there's how the information is scheduled. It's quite simple. You look at either a day or a week or a month view, and you just drag and drop those services when they're due. So essentially, if we go back a step, when we looked at the equipment service schedule, all you need to do is on a weekly basis, perhaps, or again, everyone's different, however often they plan forward. Go to service schedule, raise those jobs, appears in here straight away, and then you just plot it on the diary.
Yeah, and then you manage it in the field like any other job.
Exactly. Again, that's a completely different webinar doing the mobile software, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we looked at mobile forms in a previous one, didn't we? And because the other thing is with preventative maintenance or planned maintenance jobs, almost without exception, the engineer will be completing some kind of maintenance check sheet, won't they?
A document.
And we covered that in mobile forms as well, Denise. So if people want to go back and have a look at that, they can see how those forms are associated with different types of maintenance jobs and how the engineer uses them and how we're able to amend and configure those. In fact, I think you're going to touch on the area of the system where you can do that, but for a different purpose, aren't you?
Yeah, so those documents would come back instantly, and you would then get these icons on where the Service Genie eye is. So there's various icons on different jobs. The paperclip shows that actually there's some documentation brought back from the engineer instantly, so that comes back live once they've completed it. That could be, as you've mentioned, a job sheet.
Yeah, it could be check sheet,
photos, anything like that. We then have the work done notes as well. So that's showing that there's been some work carried out on this. And if you hover over it, it will give us an indication of what that is. Finished job, very brief, probably one of my jobs.
It's saving you having to go into the job, isn't it? To find out information.
A quick glance at it.
Yeah, you can clearly see what's going on. Things are moving forward.
Yeah, and the important one is when we touched on parts earlier, this little box, this little cube is actually showing us now what stock items are booked on that job. So the green ones are showing us stock items are booked on, the PO is already there, we have the stock items in stock physically. But we notice we've got a red one here, which will show that there's parts that need to be accepted on that job. So they're not booked onto that job yet. Someone needs to action them and make sure the stock is with the right engineer for the right job.
Yes. So it's important, again, it's another webinar, but when people are wanting to buy parts, there's obviously a purchase order that you can raise, but there's also a request, in essence, like a request purchase order, isn't there? So we have things like authorizations on spend limits and stuff like that. So it might be that somebody, an engineer or somebody internally has said, I want these 12 parts for this job. And then there is a level where somebody authorizes that. So in that example, you're saying in order to fulfill this job, we need these 100 items, which seems quite excessive in that respect. Yeah. But they're currently on a part request. So that's where the job is. We know that actually we've not raised the purchase order even for those jobs. We can see instantly what situation we're in respect of that job.
Basically, yeah. And then we do also have an orange icon as well, which you can see I've hovered over of that cube. So 4 items are open on this PO for this job. So the stock or the warehouse guys are waiting for this stock to come in before we can actually do that service job. And we can see which PO it is. So PO 74.
Yeah. So if we want to go interrogate that PO or interrogate the parts guy or interrogate whoever's raised the order, not interrogate might be a bit stronger, but
interrogate the parts guy.
if we want to go and ask the person that's responsible for raising the purchase orders, we can give them a purchase order number and say, do we know when these items are coming in? Exactly. Or you could go and look at it yourself if you're able to access that part system.
Yeah, it just gives you that traceability. So you've got from where we started here, you've already got the resources required, so the estimated hours and how many engineers you might need on the job, and you've also got the stock items on there too. So it's the materials. So you've got time and materials of the service job already pre-planned in here to get. So you've already got all that information.
But again, there's a lot of information that you can show or hide in this screen, isn't there, Adam?
Yes, again, with column options. So it's worth pointing out, we have these column options throughout the whole system. So every user can determine what information they see and what's important to them. Mm-hmm. So I've got the ones that are important to me, such as customers, postcodes, agree visit dates, job completion. But there's a raft of ones you can pick and choose here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so you should be able to really get a configuration that shows you what you want to know to make your day quicker.
Yeah, basically.
Well, that's the key to systems like this is, and configure is the right word. You need to be able to configure the system so that it's unique to you, because everybody's different. Even people who work in the same industry do things slightly differently, and it's important to be able to accommodate that. And so the system fits the way that they work rather than the other way around. I think that's feedback we used to get all the time, isn't it? That systems can be too restrictive because you have to work in a certain way. There's no way of actually configuring what's available to you and what you see.
And it's important to mention is that's just not for the company users. That's not just for the company wide. What they see is for each individual user.
Yeah, understood. Okay, where are we off to next?
So I think I'll just very, very briefly touch on what we call the communication center. Now, the communication center is basically found within the customer account detail. So I'm on an account here for Service Genie forklifts. And what this screen is doing is basically establishing and listing how you communicate with that customer in terms of what documents and emails are sent to him, in what format, and how they're delivered.
So anything customer facing?
Anything. It could be a job sheet, a job invoice, a quote, a contract. We're determining this top part here, what format the document goes in. So how does that document look? Are we going to email it to them? Is someone in the office going to download it themselves and email it themselves? It's just determining that basically.
Okay.
But with that, we have an email functionality too. So if I scroll to the very bottom, what we have here is reminder communications. Now, this isn't a document, this is an email. So what we're saying here is for Service Genie forklifts, are we going to send them a service email? So we can send reminders on the timeline that suits our customers. So what we're going to do here is we're going to send every month or every 3 months, a service reminder from my colleague Steve's email, and it will go to myself, but it will go to Service Junior Forklifts. And that email reminder could can be any sort of template. But in this example, we've got here an email that will go to Service Junior Forklifts and remind them here what service they've got due. And what's important to point out here is all this information populates when the email goes automatically. So it would list out their sites, their equipment IDs, their make and models and serial numbers, and it even gives them an option to accept and reject it.
Okay, so what you're saying here is if every 3 months you're sending an email to this customer that says, in the next 3 months, these are the services you have due on these dates, and then they have the ability to accept or reject them.
Yes. So again, it all goes back down to forward planning with your services.
And that's what we're saying is this is automated. So this is just going to go regardless. So what would happen if they accept? What happens?
Good question. It comes up to notifications up here. So again, depending on who needs to receive that notification, let's say a service manager as an example, we'll get a notification to say Service Junior Forklifts have accepted the service, and you can then go in and plot that on the diary for an engineer to go on that day.
That's pretty good actually, because back in the day when I was speaking to people more often than I am now, one of the more labor-intensive tasks was going through the equipment service schedule for the PMs that were due and ringing everybody up and trying to fit the dates in the diary and saying, you have a service due, can we come and do it? And people would constantly put them off because they might be busy or because they didn't want the downtime. And that is also a huge contributory factor to people getting behind on their preventative maintenance schedule or their planned maintenance schedule. Yeah. I mean, in fact, it's probably a 50-50 with people that we speak to. Is partly it's due to that customer's inability to get on top of the schedule, but also the other 50% is because they're constantly asking people and trying to fit them in, and they're rebuffing their requests to actually go and do the visit, or they just can't get hold of them, or they don't return the calls. Or
exactly. And well, here they can just do it automatically. They don't even need to know the emails are going out because they are going out in the background.
But if they're rejecting them or not responding, that's going in the notifications too, isn't it?
Yeah, either way. So you'll get a notification if they accept, reject, and also if they haven't responded.
So the obvious point I suppose I was going to make was if you send 100 of these out, actually the time and effort that you spend is then only going to be on the people that haven't responded.
Yeah.
Exactly. Rather than ringing everybody.
No,
you've already got, of the 100 that you sent out, 50 have accepted. You've got to focus your time and effort on 50. So you've reduced your need for time and effort and admin to be spent by 50%.
Yeah, it's just one less worry. You don't have to worry about the ones that the services are going to go ahead.
Yeah.
And then when they are agreed as well, we have the same concept of sending a service date agreed, which I won't go into that email, but it's very similar to what we just looked at a second ago. A confirmation email to send to your customer, basically.
Yeah, great.
So that's a really handy tool because it just sort of takes away it takes away the admin of contacting your customers.
Understood.
And then lastly, just to explain where we are here, I'm going to jump into what we call our business intelligence, which is our reporting suite, our reporting module. We have lots of reports in here, from KPIs to standard reports. Then we also have the concept of self-service reports, which is really important because it basically allows our customers or the users to go into the system and create their own reports, their own unique reports.
Yeah.
Rather than go to the software provider, which happens quite a lot, they'll say, can we create, in this instance, a service forecast report? The software provider go, yeah, no problem. That's going to be X amount.
Well, if we just talk about this report specifically, could we then have a look at where you created it?
We can have a quick look. Yeah, that's
just to give it some context. I'm just mindful of that we're showing the finished article here. We've done it lots of times in previous webinars, so I know that people who've watched them regularly might be able to see it, but that looks pretty self-explanatory. And I understand why you've pulled this one together because it's one on the home screen, but it basically perfectly summarizes a lot of the things that we've discussed today as we bring it to a close, because what we're saying there is, what are my service commitments, which I now know because of all the reasons we've explained previously, what are my service commitments moving forward? And you look at that, you go, well, I've got a very large commitment in March, not so much in February and April. So what does that tell me to do? It tells me that I need to level March out over those 2 months, probably.
Yeah. And with that, you can drill down into it as well. So I can say, well, what accounts are they? So that's essentially where the report will be. You design that, and the self-service report creator. You drill down as I did a minute ago, and you can see what's forecasted. I think I won't go into actually designing the report today, because I think that's a completely different webinar, which we could spend a good 45 minutes talking about it alone.
Yeah, well, the reporting capabilities are vast, and I think the point you were trying to make, and you were right to, is that any of the data that's in the system that relates to anything, but specifically in this example to contracts, you can actually generate a report by defining the parts or the data fields, as we call them. So what's important to you, what do you want to report on, and as you've illustrated, if that report then becomes important to you on an ongoing basis, you can save it into other parts of the system.
Basically, yeah, it gives you that full capability of looking at every single data field and pulling out which one you need to report on.
Yeah, great. Well, we've gone 45 minutes when we intended to do 30 minutes, which we do quite regularly. So we'll try and draw it to a conclusion there. Listen, I hope people have found some value in that, and I know I certainly enjoyed it. Will be another webinar probably in the new year, I guess now. So for those of you that are watching it live or watching it in the very near future, have a Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy new year, and we'll see you all again soon. But gents, for now, thank you very much for that. If anyone does have any questions, then as it says on the screen, there are contact details there. Please get in contact with us, and we'd be more than happy to have a chat with you or answer any questions you have that you might relate to what you've seen today. So gents, thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Cheers, thank you.
Bye.
Cheers, thanks, bye.